Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Overpriced JPEGs. I'm Carly Riley, and many of you know this is, loosely speaking, Intellectual Property Month here at Overpriced JPEGs. And really what that means is I'm exploring everything about IP. How do you monetize it? If you're an investor, how do you make money on it? How is Web3 changing the traditional world of intellectual property? Last week, I spoke with John Rogers, who's really an IP expert and has spent decades thinking about IP and franchise IP in particular. Go check out that episode if you haven't listened yet. And today on the podcast, I have the co-founders of the DeadHeads project. DeadHeads is really, I think, the first NFT project to plant this flag of we're creating decentralized IP specifically in the form of creating a show or, an animation studio, or our goal is to make movies and TV. They talk about in this episode how they were inspired by Bored Apes, who of course decentralized their intellectual property in certain ways in a very public way. But these guys planted the flag of like a decentralized production studio. And I have to say, this is one of the few conversations I've had where it made me want to launch an NFT project. Like, it made me want to start an NFT project. And that might sound weird. I even say this in the episode, like, you would think me being in this space, maybe I want to do an NFT project, but I know how much work it is. And personally, I don't have a reason to launch an NFT project at this point yet. So maybe someday, but not now. But these guys, I just got excited hearing what they were talking about, hearing what they're building, how they're approaching it. I was like, oh shit, like, put me in, coach. I really want to be in the game. So hopefully you have the same reaction. I hope you find it all as interesting and as exciting as I do. If you're building a project and part of that project's mission is to build intellectual property, and by that you really mean some sort of narrative or story, listen to this episode, listen to the way these guys think about it. If you're interested in starting a project in general, I think it's worth listening to this episode because they talk about what their approach to this all was back when they first started. So anyhow, really enjoyed this conversation. One caveat, Jeremy, one of the co-founders, was based out of El Salvador while we were speaking, and the internet connection was less than ideal. But if it is a little choppy at points, or if there's a little bit of disjointedness to parts of this conversation, that is probably why. I don't think it'll ruin the convo overall. I think there's a lot of nuggets in here, and I think it'll hopefully be a pretty enjoyable listening experience. But that is my one caveat. I apologize if it's a little funky. And we do at the very end talk about why Jeremy is in El Salvador. The answer is he's a vagabond because he's not from there. He's a vagabond who lives around the world. And I ask him about that because I think that's fascinating. Okay, with that, here's a word from our sponsors. And then it's time for Jeremy, Jenson, and Tempo, co-founders of the DeadHeads project.
Axie Infinity is a game universe filled with cute, fascinating little creatures called Axies that players can collect as pets. Players aim to battle, breed, collect, raise, and build kingdoms for their Axies. There are and will be many varied gaming experiences for Axies, many of them having players compete with each other using complex strategies and tactics to attain top rankings or be rewarded with coveted resources. Others will have them complete quests, defeat bosses, and unlock in-depth storylines. There are countless unique Axies that players can collect with varying body parts and experiences. The Axie universe is a player-owned economy where the players can truly own, buy, sell, and trade the resources they earn in the game through skilled gameplay and contributions to the ecosystem. It's a digital nation where people come together globally with their Axies to play, earn, and live. Join the Axie revolution at axieinfinity.com/bankless. Polygon is Ethereum's largest and most vibrant scaling solution to date. With millions of monthly users and all of the biggest DeFi apps, the Polygon ecosystem has turned into a blossoming metropolis of DeFi activity. Transactions on Polygon are quick and cheap, allowing users the freedom to achieve their DeFi goals, all while being economically anchored to Ethereum. But Polygon isn't just the proof-of-stake sidechain. The Polygon team is building a suite of scaling solutions, including Polygon Hermes, Maiden, Nightfall, and Zero, all with different design choices in order to be optimized for all possible crypto use cases. If you're a developer who wants to build on the Polygon ecosystem, go to the link in the show notes to check out their fantastic documentation. And if you're a user who just wants to experience fast and cheap DeFi, you can bridge over your ETH or other tokens and start playing around with any of the thousands of applications that are available on Polygon.
All right. I am so excited for today's conversation. As anybody who's been following this show knows, this is a bit of a month of IP and conversations about IP here at Overpriced JPEGs. And really, there could not be a better team to have on to discuss this than these two folks here, Jeremy Jenson and Tempo, the leaders of the DeadHeads project, whose goal, as stated by the team, I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but is really to try and decentralize Hollywood. So a nice, big, hairy, audacious goal for people who lived through the BHAG era of like startup thinking. And I just can't wait to dive in and really talk more about this project. I think it's sometimes misunderstood by the casual observer, and I'm hoping that this conversation demystifies that and really shows people what y'all are doing. So welcome to the show. Thank you so much, both of you, for being here.
Thank you so much, Carly, for having us. My name is Jeremy Jenson, and I'm one of the co-founders of DeadHeads.
Thank you. I said leaders because I stumbled there. So thank you. Co-founders.
Leaders, co-founders, co-creators.
Leaders, co-founders, yeah. Czars of DeadHeads, leaders of the underworld.
Like
many names apply. Let's just start briefly with each of your, kind of quick bios. And then I actually want to dive into your stories more as a way to understand how you came to this project. But let's start with the quick bios for each of you, Jeremy and Tempo.
Thanks so much. I have sort of been in film when I was younger, and then I worked in film for a year. I worked around movies like Supergirl, shows like Supergirl, and plenty of movies, a lot of indie ones, and a lot of larger TV series. In essence, what I found was when being on set is that it was like a lot of laborers and not a lot of creatives, because the decision making was done by like a head studio and a director, and it really, the buck stopped there. Anyways, this was all about 2016. Fast forward to this past year, and I've been working in marketing for probably the majority of that time. And my friend Tempo called me up and said, I've been making AI art. And then we saw NFTs as a great way to utilize the AI art. So we put out these NFTs of this original AI art. Yeah, and then as the space progressed from February, we both realized there was a greater opportunity. And that opportunity lay in using sort of this model where you could give your IP into the NFT and then integrate it into like an animated series. Originally, like Pokemon was something that we saw, as being like a great application of someone that could use an NFT. We often talk about R2D2. Imagine if you could mint R2D2 at the beginning, essentially giving the characters up and building the story. I'll let Tempo expand upon that.
Okay, Tempo, give me your quick flyover bio.
Yeah. Okay. Really quick, high level. I guess I'll just say sort of my side of how this all came to be. So it all started with back in January, I called up Jeremy to start a business creating artificial intelligence artwork, which is where my background is. I've been doing that for the last 5 years. Extremely passionate about that on the technological side. And so as we're sort of selling these things as like a traditional e-commerce brand where we actually deliver and ship canvases of AI artwork to our customers, we on the side, Jeremy was kind of messaging me about this up and coming thing, NFTs, which were very much not known back then. At least I didn't really know about them back then. And so we both sort of started doing a lot of research into it. And it was such an easy transition to make, considering AI art is already digital in nature. And so when we started looking at NFTs, we were like, shit, like this makes a lot of sense for us to start selling AI artwork as NFTs. Why don't we do a launch and try it out, get our feet wet, learn about what this community is about. Jeremy's been in crypto for a few years now, so he was kind of already in that group. But one thing led to another, ended up getting on OpenSea's homepage for our first launch, and we're in touch with the CEO and CFO of OpenSea back then, because they weren't that big of a company back when we were just starting out.
Was it Devin Finzer still?
Who was it, Jer?
Alex.
Yeah, right, Alex.
Okay.
Alex and one other.
I don't know. You've gone too deep into the OpenSea org chart for me.
Really, really nice guys, and they had us on the homepage. Everything sold out really, really quickly, and we started realizing the appetite for digital artwork, which we didn't necessarily realize was a thing back then, and how powerful NFTs are in terms of digital ownership. And so we just dove headfirst at that moment, which was about March of 2021. Yes.
2021.
Yeah, 2021, yeah. And do you want me to sort of get into how DeadHeads came to be through that?
Well, I want to set the stage for DeadHeads first. So what I want to do is set the stage, because I want to be sensitive that there may be audience members for whom this is the first time they're really hearing about Deadhead. So I want to set the stage, and then what I really want to do is like dive deep on how this project happened, all of that. So I was saying to Jeremy before we kicked off here, this might be a longer lead into a project than I usually give, but I do think you're doing something unique that warrants maybe a little bit of context. So I want to ask if you agree. I'm about to break down what I would call as like the categories of intellectual property, you could say. And I want to see if you agree with it. And then maybe within that, explain where you feel like Deadheads falls. So I think you have this traditional world of intellectual property, especially as it pertains to like the entertainment world, where things are very centralized. And you have some studio and you have some set of executives who are centrally controlling a piece of intellectual property and managing it, et cetera, et cetera. And I think the closest analog to something like that, and this sounds dismissive, but I don't mean it that way at all, to the Web3 world would be something like what Gary Vaynerchuk is doing with VeeFriends, where he's saying, really what this art is in the long term is a collectible. And you're trusting me as like a brilliant businessman who's had a lot of success to build something incredible out of this intellectual property, and then you'll end up benefiting from it because you're a token holder and you hold this collectible. And then there's all sorts of other cool benefits too. You get to go to VCon, et cetera, et cetera. So it's like a collectible on steroids. Then I think on the opposite end of the spectrum in Web3, you have something that's very new and that I don't know of good comps to in the Web2 world, which is what you have with like Gremplin and Cryptodes, or, Dom Hoffman's Blitmaps project, which is, it's totally in the Creative Commons. We retain no copyright, no rules, have at it. If you want to use it for nefarious things, okay, we don't have any control over this thing. And that's this very extreme version. And then I think you have these middle ground projects that are interesting. Bored Apes is one of these, where folks have a lot of rights and control over their particular character, but they don't necessarily have rights over the project as the whole. And there are parameters being placed on the project as a whole around, you can't use it for certain super nefarious things. And my understanding with y'all is you fall somewhere in that middle category. And I think it's worth talking about the nuances there of a you versus a Bored Apes, for example, because I think it's really interesting. But does that general read of the environment feel right to y'all? And is that where you would put Deadheads?
Yeah, so like you said, Bored Apes fall very much on the decentralized IP aspect, while retaining rights over the brand itself. We're incredibly similar to Bored Apes in that respect, where any characters or NFTs that you own within the Deadheads universe, you own commercial and non-commercial rights over them. You can do whatever you want. You can make as much money with them as you want. You can sell merchandise with them, but you can't market it as an official Deadheads brand, or you can't put the Deadheads branding on it. So logo, name, things like that. Just as an example that might help people's understanding is one of our collectors is trademarking his specific Deadhead with the name Sal, and is creating an underworld comic book centered around that specific character. But what he wouldn't be allowed to do is say that this is a Deadheads comic book or put Deadheads on the comic book or anything. It's a total derivative where he owns full ownership over his specific character. He can do whatever he wants with it.
Quick question on that. So the benefit to him is he's inspired by this artwork, and given that, even if it's not officially a Deadheads project, given that it obviously has the Deadheads look, his bet is, if he does something really good, he'll be able to activate potentially the Deadheads community around this thing that he's doing in a cool way. Is that maybe the calculation that somebody like that would be making?
Exactly,
for this project?
yeah. And
for his project?
we love that too. Like we as a brand, when someone puts out derivative works, we love encouraging it and showing our community it and highlighting what they're doing, because that's exactly the whole point of this is we want our brand, or the characters of our brand, to sort of percolate throughout the universe in a decentralized way, where everyone's coming up with all these different ideas, and we're really putting the power back in the hands of the creatives, as opposed to in the hands of a studio head, or in the hands of one specific project creator who he's the only one who can do everything with it.
Okay, now finish that second part of your answer that I interrupted.
I'll finish, and then Jeremy, you can jump in. But where we differ from Bored Apes is with Bored Apes, they essentially say go out and do whatever you want with your IP, but what's difficult for a lot of these holders is that you don't necessarily have the resources to create anything with your IP, or the time. And so having a picture or having this piece of IP doesn't necessarily give you any benefit in the long term, because you don't necessarily have the resources or time to do anything with it. With Deadheads, what we're doing is we're trying to encourage people that might be on that side of the spectrum to have the reach and to have the ability to very easily and more hands-off percolate their specific IP through our animated series. So that's why we're developing an official animated series, movies, commercials, comic books, like things like this in our multimedia universe, where you can just go and give us access and permission to use your character, and we go and put it in our content. So you don't actually have to go out and make a name for yourself. You can just give us a license back to use your IP, and we'll do that because we're kind of the back engine running the brand.
So you're trying to have the best of both worlds, where you're saying we want to empower individual creators who want to go do something, but we also believe that we can create some incredible IP. So if you're not yourself some talented, incredible creator who's going to go be the next George Lucas, well, then put your faith in us
Exactly.
to try and do that, because that's not your particular skill set.
Yes, exactly.
Jeremy, did you have something you wanted to chime in with?
Well, I just think Tempo did such a fantastic job explaining it, and so have you, in the terms that you're sort of investing in the character, and then that gives us the ability to like build out this world and build out all this IP around Deadheads. And then as a result, your asset, its value is sort of tethered to the quality of our story. And in the longer term, I mean, one of our visions is to make sure we're including a lot of other projects and using some of our really amazing technology, which we haven't really touched upon yet, like our DApp and whatnot, and making sure that Deadheads has the reach and the capability to sort of give everyone's NFT a purpose.
So we'll definitely get into the technology side, because I know that's important to y'all. And I've heard you in other interviews talk about how that's an area where you really want to innovate. I want to stay on this intellectual property, that you guys as the creative lab piece a minute. So explain a little bit more about what you're doing for folks. You have this very short animated series right now. Talk about that, and talk about the relationship between, and how it works functionally, this relationship between your NFT holders and then the show that you currently have, and whatever your future plans are there.
So to speak to that, we currently have, we kind of have a casting pool. So we use a staking mechanism, which in crypto means you basically lock up your NFT for a set period of time. So a lot of our holders locked up for 24 months, let's say. Once in that casting pool, we're able to use those NFTs in any of our content. Now, our content is about a team of, well, between the people managing it and producing it, is about 20 odd people. And this is just growing. At the beginning, it was writers from the community, animators just sort of outsourced. And as we go along this journey, we start to bring in some incredible people. And we're able to build out that world really how we see fit for our story. I mean, typically when you're building an IP, you're building off of a comic or book that's already sort of delivered on the story. So when you reverse that process, the attention to building out your narrative has to be just like much more, you have to be much more attentive to how that story plays out. One of the things we've done up to date is release these episodes that are about 5 to 10 minutes in length, and then they're growing and growing. Like this five will be the first time we have a true professional writing team on it, and I'm really excited for that. And then they're just growing and growing. But in the interim between season 1 and 2, we're sort of looking at doing shorter episodes that are about 1 to 2 minutes. They can try new directors and writers, and and just put these pieces together in a way that we can gauge interest in the narrative and make sure as we go along this journey, we're building the right narrative for Deadheads holders.
So I'm excited because I've now binged, I guess you can say binged, about a series that's I think like 20 minutes long total right now. But I've binged some of the episodes, and I'm very excited for episode 5. So glad to hear that. I think this is where I would love for you all to maybe talk about, how did you end up here running your own like movie studio or TV studio? You're making AI art. You get onto the front of OpenSea. So you're like, oh wow, this is going pretty well. How did you land here?
I'll quickly speak to that,
Sure.
And then I'll let Tempo as well, because maybe we have different takes on it. But I think where it sort of birthed was this AI project that included a character, and then all credit to Bored Apes, because once Bored Apes came out, I think it was end of April, early May, everyone sort of saw the uses of IP as being very interesting. It was the first time generative had been covered, but IP allocation was not something that we were really that familiar with. We'd done it with AI House in February, but it wasn't like a big project, hadn't like really nailed that yet. And when they did, we sort of went to the drawing board, and I had this background in film and Tempo has this background in tech. And we said, what would be the best use of NFTs, looking at how, Bored Apes have entered the space, and looking at how CryptoPunks did, and looking at Zed Run, which is a game, and looking across this entire spectrum. So research. And I just thought, I mean, what's stopping someone from building a production where they're not just stagnant images, they're characters, they're part of it? What if you had Pikachu? How much would that be worth in year 1 versus year 10? What if you like, and you were the sole person? You could go off and build a game. You could go off and have a book. You could have a movie series. If you had if that narrative had existed for your character and you own the IP of that character, you could build it out. So like, let's think of characters like, let's say, Harley Quinn is played by Margot Robbie. Well, the person selling Harley Quinn toys makes all the money. That's the head of the studio. They're making all the money. Now, what if the person playing Harley Quinn could go off and make ends for what they had created in that character celebrity relationship? And that's just a really interesting concept that has not been explored.
Tempo, do you have another version of events, or is that how you remember it?
No, that was all 100% valid. I'll kind of give my takes and the things that I learned along the way as well, though. After launching AI Art House, AI Artwork, we at that point in time we thought NFTs and the direction it was going was digital artwork, as did 98% of the NFT community back then. What we started realizing with some of these other collections that came out, like Chubby's, etc., was that the power within NFTs wasn't just artwork; it was community, and the community that it drives and the camaraderie that it builds is extraordinarily strong and powerful. And so what we wanted to try to go out and build was something that was community first and something that could survive long term in the space, because clearly the space is extremely speculative. A ton of these projects are going to go to zero. And so Jeremy and I sat together for a while and we said, what is it that actually makes a project succeed long term in this space? And the word that we came up with was narrative. And narrative doesn't necessarily mean an animated series, but in our case it did. But narrative at that point was like, it could have been NBA Top Shot. Why is NBA Top Shot successful? Because it has narrative in the actual NBA, right? Like, new things happen in the NBA that make things more interesting for everyone to collect. Everybody stays around. It's all very interesting. We kind of wanted to mimic that, but by utilizing an animated series. So where traditionally with an NFT project, it might get stale. You have an awesome community. When people get bored or go to another project, that kind of dies out, right? Whereas with DeadHeads, because we're building out this narrative, this underlying narrative with your characters that you own, it adds so much longevity to the project and to the vision. And that was sort of how we stumbled upon the concept and the roadmap behind DeadHeads. I can touch on how we ended up at the art, which is also kind of a somewhat interesting story. I'll touch on it really, really quickly. AI Art House, obviously my background is AI. After AI Art House, we were looking at okay, AI artwork as physical canvases and as digital artwork, very cool. What other forms of AI art can we use? And what we came across was audio. So AI generated audio, and the concept that we wanted to explore was resurrecting dead musicians and dead artists by deep faking their audio and sort of bringing them back.
Kind of eerie, kind of creepy, kind of interesting.
And exactly, eerie, creepy, interesting. Those are the exact three words that we had as well. And a bit of a, it's kind of questionable legally as well for a few different reasons. Like, it's quite a legal gray area. So we ended up not going down that path, but we got these models made based off of dead musicians and with the idea of like having this vibe of creepy dystopian sort of rebels who were back from the dead, ready to like, disrupt the land of the living. And all we did was throw away the audio part of that and generate basically, obviously touch things up here and there, but that's like the whole vibe of how DeadHeads came to be was dead musicians resurrecting and then taking away the musicians part and just having dead things rising. So that's why a ton of our copy early on was all about, the dead will rise. Like, it's all about the dead rising. That's the whole concept behind DeadHeads. But that's actually where it all started, which not a lot of people know about. But
I love that. Well, we're definitely keeping that part in. I love hearing the origin stories of these concepts. I talked to Betty NFT as my first episode about Dead Fellas, and she had this like immediate thing of like, we're doing zombies, like I like, or we're doing like that kind of eerie thing. So it's fun for me. And my next question was going to be, where do you start? So you're like, okay, we can make art. Obviously you've been doing the art side of things and you have a little bit of film or you have a film background to some extent, right? But like, you're like, great, we're going to create a massive intellectual property and narrative and story and characters and like, what was step one in beginning this process then?
How did it all begin is a fantastic question. We sort of went to our community, and earlier in my career when I was working on these film sets, I sort of noticed tons of laborers fulfilling on one vision. And so in this scenario, our ethos has always kind of been, let's get the people in the community to really contribute. As a result, we found some producers who were Emmy Award winners. We found writers who had written incredible comics. And these people all came into the fold. We built from we're sort of looking at production to distribution to be sort of as decentralized as possible. And over time, we realized that while competing with all these other projects, it was to our advantage to onboard sort of writers who had incredible experience writing about great stories, world builders, animators with plenty of experience, and it would just make our end product of DeadHeads better. So at the moment, it's a hybrid of like community members who are contributing with what they're able to do, be it voice acting or show running, as well as professionals sprinkled in there. And we're just, as we go further along this path, able to bring in, I mean, the most incredible people. And this year, a lot of them will come to light that will be able to guide this IP to where it deserves to be.
So the original vision where you start is basically, hey, what we know how to do is do an NFT drop because we've done that. And we know how to produce the artwork. So did y'all handle the creating the layers? And obviously with this AI art background, did you have somebody else who did those sort of digital layers, or y'all handled those and do this NFT drop?
We have our incredible artist Posy, who actually did all of the artwork for Deadheads, and then I was responsible for the generative scripting and the 3D modeling of it in the 3D software. Yeah.
Okay, awesome. So you're like, all right, we're gonna do this NFT drop, we're gonna raise money, and out of this community, we'll find the people who are gonna create our stories and our world. Did you know that the first thing you wanted to do was like a mini YouTube series? Was that obvious from the get, or was that something that evolved as you saw who was in your community?
Our northern light has always been to do it for as much distribution as possible and reach as many people as we can. Because at the end of the day, we are building an IP, like if you're building Transformers, what have you. So you really want to reach the maximum amount of people. And YouTube is a free, accessible way to do that. We've seen other projects go like a more closed off route. And I can't really understand the benefit to doing that because the value isn't necessarily in each show and owning each show like with thousands of other people. It's participating and really owning your character and having like
I remember some fierce
value.
Debates in the Stoner Cats Discord about whether or not we should just open up Stoner Cat episodes to everyone. And I will say I was in the camp of, yes, let's do it. Let's show everybody a Stoner Cat episode.
Yeah, it just makes sense. I mean, you're arbitrarily blocking it because you can, not because it makes more sense, I think, when you do that. Like the idea of the episode living on the blockchain is cool, but it can live on the blockchain and it can live on YouTube. There's no need to do one or the other.
And so in your initial marketing of this project, did you say, hey, we want writers and we want like creatives and talent. Like this is the kind of person we want to buy into this project because we're going to need you to build this project. Was that a part of the marketing? And you're nodding your head for people who can't see. So I'm going to do a quick follow-up, which is you can expand on that and answer that. But then the follow-up is, and do you feel like that helped you get more reach for the project initially? I'm interested in marketing strategies in general, as there's so many projects that launch today that want attention, want to sell out, want like anybody to pay attention to them. So I'm curious how y'all did it.
I'll start off by telling you what we did not want. What we didn't want and what Jeremy had seen previously was, Jeremy and I as the two executive producers, we have a vendor of animators who clock in, clock out, creating someone else's IP that they don't necessarily have any ownership or don't really care about. You have writers who are writing because they're getting paid and they're writing 10 other things. And this is just one thing. Like what we wanted to build here and what we are building is a brand where the creatives are actually taking ownership and taking pride in their work. So they're actually doing it like on in their spare time. Our animators are like creating fun little derivatives and our writers are so passionate about it. They're constantly coming up with new world ideas. Like we're kind of taking almost like the Tesla model where a ton of employees of Tesla are extremely passionate about the brand. They love what they're doing. And we wanted to take that into sort of the Hollywood space. And maybe I'll let Jeremy touch on the specific marketing a little bit more, but that was sort of like that was like the North Star.
That was the culture you wanted to create.
That's the culture. Yeah.
Yeah. The marketing, we didn't want to gatekeep anybody from entering, but we didn't at the time. Gas wars were a huge point of contention, and I mean they still are, but to a degree they've kind of cooled off because people realize that they're necessary. But at the time, gas wars were like it's the project's fault. People were so sort of in the NFT space were so unaware of the causes of gas wars that they would like blame the founders.
Oh yeah, I remember that. And so what month did you launch? Remind me.
June 30th. So
you launched in June of 2021. And at that point, did Did you all have a little bit of followings in the space, networks in the space because of the work you'd already been doing? One thing I talk about a lot on this show to people who are thinking about launching a project is like any other industry, it's helpful to have a network.
Yeah.
It's helpful to know people in the space and not be just like an artist who out of the blue pops up and hopes to sell your project for $1 million. That's not really how it works. So I'm curious for y'all, how did you get that initial community? How did you get that initial following? Or, for DeadHeads, maybe it was coming from the past work you had done.
That's a great question. We obviously had a bit of a community from when we launched AA Art House. We did have a Discord, and we had some names in it, and almost every name that was in that Discord has gone on to do big and great things in the space, actually, just because, they were so early back then.
Zeneca is one that you talked to.
My man.
Zeneca, Crypto Jesus, Drop Acid. But oh, you might want to cut out Drop Acid. I'm not sure if we're allowed. But anyways,
oh no, you're allowed. I don't care. Yeah.
But on the Twitter side of things, it was very much untouched for us. Like I created my Twitter account for DeadHeads, and I started getting followers. I started reaching out to people. Like when you're starting out, if you don't have that initial network, you really have to go ground and pound and just reach out to everyone, communicate with them, just connect, like really try to grow that network. It's not necessarily the sexiest thing in the world, but when I go back and scroll through all of my DMs from back near sort of the middle of June, some of the people, like it's quite funny because like it's a bunch of people that are now quite big in the space, and we have this history of me DMing them back like June 30th of like, hey, you gotta, can you please check out this project? DeadHeads, like it's 3D art, which was very unique back then. But I think what really helped us explode, considering we didn't necessarily have a huge network, was the fact that the art was so unique for that specific point in time. So Pawsey, our artist, did all this 3D art, which was somewhat unheard of at that point. It was basically ZenFT was sort of the other one who did the bonsais. But people seeing like sort of a PFP based 3D model was quite unheard of. And a lot of people took to the art immediately. And so we started getting a bunch of people in the space, a bunch of people on our Discord. And it very much like got out of control in the best of ways possible very quickly. Like we didn't know how to manage a Discord at that point, really, but that was getting that much volume. Like we were getting spam all over the place, but that's kind of all part of the fun, all part of the process.
It's fascinating to me that the original community, it sounds like, came in part because of the 3D art, not because of the decentralizing IP premise.
I will say we don't know exactly why they came in. We don't have the analytics behind that. But Gary Vaynerchuk is on record saying that he came in specifically because we're the first people to angle towards production. So although we were the first 3D sort of character model, we were also the first person to tackle production and NFTs. I will also say we sort of this is for new founders, we sort of sat down and looked at the projects that were in existence and we said, how can we make a difference? How can we really make an impact based on who we are? But also like these projects have like a few thousand people. They're all comprised of a few thousand people. When you break it down, you just have to find a few thousand believers. And like, then you're going to make it.
I joked about early, the startup entrepreneurs who were in like the BHAG era. I feel like that was like a whole thing where there were like a bunch of books about having to have your BHAG. And I feel like there's also the like 10,000 true believers. Like we're hitting all the notes here, just like startup founders, have your big, hairy, audacious goal, have your 10,000 true believers. That makes sense though. That's a theme that I hear a lot when I talk to founders has been somewhat luck. We hit at the right time, but we found that point of differentiation. We found that thing that wasn't being done in the space yet, which of course gets harder as the space evolves because more and more things start being done. But
I mean, I would argue that a lot of things that we see now are like replicas of things that came out like years ago or like in this past year. Like even look at this last week, there's like Kenzo that looks like Only One. I mean, you see it happen like constantly.
Oh, there's so many. And it's interesting to see some derivative projects even are like, doing very well. I tend to kind of shy away. I like something that feels totally new and revolutionary, but I think some of these derivatives end up going off to do very well. I want to keep going in this very detailed timeline because I think you guys are building something so unique, and I really like knowing at each stage what was going on. So you sell out your first round of DeadHeads. You've said, hey, we want writers, we want animators, we want talented people. And at that point, you have this concept that you're going to do a short YouTube series first with, Netflix as the thing you're putting on your vision board or whatever, some version of that. And how do you go about it? You put an application link in the Discord and say, show us what you've got? How do you go about now crafting a story and a show and, again, becoming a production company?
We actually did exactly that.
Okay. I guess I could do it too. Yeah. Okay.
We opened an open election to everyone who had just joined our community and said, what are you good at? How can you fit? Here's where we need people. And Tempo can sort of expand on that, but it really was just like, who is good at what? And then we had, out of that, an Emmy Award-winning producer. We had writers who were all over like tons of incredible IP that you're familiar with. We had artists and we had marketers. We had business development, like you see in Ben Exit, who's currently working for the team as well. We had developers like Squirtle. These people all that still work here came from the community. Some have gone on to do other things, and some have stayed.
Yeah, it was the way that we did it was we had all these different Discord channels for all the different roles. Everyone would come in and give their spiel, and then the community would be able to vote on who they thought is sort of the most qualified for the specific role, who they would want in charge. And then whoever had the most votes, or if Jeremy and I saw multiple people that sort of had a lot of votes and were incredibly qualified, we would obviously bring them on board.
So you did like a decentralized hiring model from the beginning as well.
Yes.
And then it sounds like what has happened is that there has been some, you said this, right? You started to supplement the team then with outside folks where you're like, we have this one clear gap. Somebody from the community can't fill it. All right, we have to bring somebody from outside, which again, as I dig deeper, as I learn more, it does feel like the sweet spot is this decentralization, centralization balance, which is sort of what you're describing needing to strike in this case.
Yeah, we're really building the ship as we sail it.
Yeah.
Like there is no precedent for building an animated series and using IP that's distributed in any way, shape, or form. So in terms of how much and how qualified some people are, the one area we found that really is great source from the community are voice actors. We found that is like really engaging, and people really take to that, and it doesn't require like a massive leap of like understanding Blender to like run an animation or what have you.
Have you had awkward moments in the community where you didn't hire folks from the community and then ultimately hired folks from outside, and now the community's like, well, what the heck? It's supposed to be a community project. Like, has that been something y'all have had to navigate?
It's never actually been too bad. Like there's obviously been some voice actors and some writers and stuff who like aren't quite qualified enough to the level of quality that you need to have a show be actually successful outside of the NFT space. But everyone's very understanding and still very supportive, and at the end of the day, they're still collectors of the IP and they want to see it succeed. So we haven't had too many big issues in that department, somewhat surprisingly, actually.
That does surprise me. I've been in a lot of communities. I love communities, and I also find communities can be, scary places at times. I want to, I don't know if this is playing devil's advocate, but I want to play out a scenario for y'all and get your reactions. So I talked to a gentleman named John Rogers last week. If you haven't gone and listened to that episode, go check out that episode of John Rogers. And he was really the first person to be given this role of like overseeing franchise IP at Disney and basically being a business person saying, how are we thinking about the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise or XYZ franchise over the next 10 years? And we were talking about decentralized versus centralized models of intellectual property. And one of the concerns he raised about this decentralized or even pseudo-decentralized models, and he used Bored Apes as the example, is, if you have one Bored Ape go and sign a deal with CAA to make a movie about a backstory for that ape, and then you have another ape that goes and, signs a different movie deal for a future story about them as astronauts in space, and the stories don't align at all, you do ultimately hurt the IP as a whole, because part of what makes IP powerful is when you do have this cohesive story that you can kind of track over the long term. How do you all think about that risk? Do you communicate about that to the community of, hey, we need to be a little bit in sync here? You mentioned a mechanism y'all have earlier that I think somewhat handles this, but curious as to your reactions to that.
If I may, before Tempo, we have a trade-off, right? Is it how much these other people are hurting you, or is it how much they're helping you? And I would argue the amount it helps to have all these people with a vested interest. I'm going to talk more on this later. It's a fan community hybrid. So by having people be evangelists for their individual characters, albeit if their comic isn't a hit, it probably doesn't damage your IP because no one saw it anyway. And if it is a hit, it probably helps your IP. And ultimately, you still own DeadHeads' core story, and all these interesting sort of pieces that fly out of it give you more ability and more reach. Does it hurt your having an individual single message like story? Perhaps, if your communication channels don't do a good job of balancing it as well and letting people know what is the core narrative versus what are these offspring narratives, derivatives.
I just want to push a little bit further because I think, of course, if somebody creates a comic that is lame or doesn't work and nobody sees it, it's not a problem. But I think, what about the scenario where UTA, one of the biggest talent agencies in the world, reps one ape, and CAA, the other biggest talent agency in the world, reps another ape, and now they're making movies that very much are going to be seen by people, and the narratives don't connect, and you don't have a sort of cohesive franchise.
The official channels can communicate what they want to communicate with the actual brand name. So having a collection of apes coming out in 2 movies, but the movies are called like, Dogs Crawl and like Happy Planet. I mean, these movies are different universes, but they're just using apes as characters. And like unilaterally, all the apes are benefiting because now your local coffee shop might want one, your Burger King ad might want one. So everyone kind of benefits in that conflict, so long as the original communication channels and the actual brand itself is like managing what is released as like their overall narrative. Now, I guess it's just constantly this balance of like, does it hurt or help you to have a lot of people out there leveraging your individual IP? I believe it helps massively.
I think this is an important point, and I do think this is an important also place where you all have a little bit of a differentiation from a Bored Apes. And what I heard you say earlier, I think is really critical, so it's probably worth repeating, which is you all have a somewhat centralized ownership on DeadHeads and DeadHeads lore and DeadHeads as franchise IP. But then these characters can go off and exist in other universes. That's a little different than Bored Apes. Now, Bored Apes can still have a central narrative to some extent of like a brand. I think I almost see them more as like Supreme, than I see them as like a movie studio trying to build the next Star Wars. So I think they are playing in different games. It isn't to be dismissive of them or their ability to succeed. But I do think it's important to make it clear in the Deadheads world, you guys are trying to build the next massive lore franchise. And you have centralized some of that in a way that needs to happen for that to be possible, while also trying to let people just amplify the sort of resonance or the fame, call it, of these sort of this artwork and these characters, and you're making the bet that all works sort of symbiotically to help the project as a whole.
Yeah, and I think what we're going to see as well is once the brand of Deadheads has sort of outlined the universe and the lore and whatnot, like it's in other production houses' best interest to sort of stay within those constraints, more or less. So like when Disney acquired Star Wars, for example, you don't see them go out and create an entirely new story because they own the IP now. It's like it's in their best interest to keep the story because that's where all the fans are. Everyone understands it. The world makes sense to them. So I think, I mean, obviously we have no idea because this has never really been done before, but I think we'll see some kind of hybrid of that play out.
I would say like an interesting real world example is like, is if Better Call Saul sucked, would it hurt Breaking Bad, or could Breaking Bad make a movie?
That's really interesting. Well, and I think from a holder perspective, because part of what I'm trying to do with this deep dive on intellectual property is to also help people understand, like, how do you monetize? Most people are in this space, right? They want to make money. Most of us aren't just like, oh, we just love the art. There's some of that, but most people want to make money. And I think it's really important if you're trying to make money to understand what kind of project you're dealing with, right? That a Blitmaps bet is not the same as a VFriends bet, is not the same as a Deadheads bet, is not the same as a Bored Apes bet. Like there's enough nuance between these projects that it actually does look a little different. And so, for example, I think your R2D2 example is really interesting because what you all are trying to do is say, hey, imagine if you own R2D2, the deals you could go make. Now you get to make the Coca-Cola brand deal for R2D2 to be in their commercial because you own that particular character. But it had to become R2D2 first, right? And if the owner of R2D2 had gone and made a stupid deal to ruin the R2D2 character before Star Wars became Star Wars, they would be effed. So the calculation here is sort of, who do you believe in most to create incredible value in IP? Are you a creator who wants to take a bet on yourself and who wants to work within this cool Deadheads ecosystem but bet on yourself? Awesome. Do you want to bet on you guys? Do you want to bet on Gary Vee? Like, who are you betting on to create amazing IP? And then you get to celebrate the fact that you own a piece of it. Is there anything I missed as part of that I would love to get your reactions to that.
That was actually extraordinarily on point. I have no other comments to make. Yeah, no, you absolutely killed that.
Podcast is
Like,
over.
mic
Good
drop.
night.
It's done. No, that was flawless. No.
No, you nailed it. I mean, it like there are risks inherent. There are risks inherent with any model, and the interesting thing that we all have to do is sort of discover what model will succeed and how to build it. If people didn't own these characters, I mean, we've heard other people have ideas to like give them production credits. I see models where there's no ownership of this IP, and I'm like, why would you want one? Because at the end of the day, having like one in thousands of these objects, and if they're not significant to the story, don't really bring any added value. With a deadhead, you not only have the character, be it Damien, you can then go in the green room and mint the couch. You can mint the fridge. You can bring with you one of one assets from within this story.
Everyone is talking about the metaverse these days, and we're all still trying to figure out what it actually is, because everyone is looking for how to get exposure to it. That is why a metaverse index fund is so important, because in such a young market, an index can give you broad exposure to all the various players who are building out all these digital worlds that will ultimately become the metaverse. And that's why you should check out the Metaverse Index from the Index Co-op. The Metaverse Index gives you simple, easy, and safe one-click exposure to the emerging open metaverse trend. The MVI Index contains some of the biggest metaverse projects out there, including Axie Infinity, Decentraland, Illuvium, and more. So join thousands of holders who have already trusted nearly $50 million to the MVI Index. And if you buy $500 of MVI on the Dharma app, you can receive $50 worth of ETH on the Polygon network. There's a link in the show notes for you to click so you can get started on your journey into the metaverse. Unstoppable Domains is the #1 provider of NFT domains. With domains ending in .crypto, .x, or .nft, Unstoppable Domains lets you replace your long, complex wallet address with a human-readable address. Using Unstoppable, you can verify the ownership over your NFTs, log into Web3 apps, and join tens of thousands of people using them as their Twitter usernames. With Unstoppable Domains, you can have all of your crypto addresses registered to one single domain. So it doesn't matter where crypto payments are coming from or where they're going. By registering all of your crypto addresses to your Unstoppable domain, all of that is taken care of in the back end. Better yet, with Unstoppable Domains, you don't have to worry about gas costs or renewal fees because you own it. Buy your domain and you can show it off as your new Twitter username. So you can get your name for as low as $5 at unstoppabledomains.com.
So this is what I want to get to next, because you're starting to segue us into where you're innovating from a technical and elsewise perspective. You mentioned the green room in there. Explain to folks the green room, the staking part of this, the show token. Explain sort of this broader ecosystem and how you guys are really innovating.
The green room enables people to collect digital assets from within the story, and each object within episodes, as like they were props from shows, can be minted to your wallet and in limited supplies. So the couch from The Simpsons, if you minted that on episode 1, season 1, what would that be worth down the line as a collector's item? So having these scarce digital assets that are part of the story that every episode in the green room you're able to bring with you adds a whole nother dimension to this NFT storytelling that we're doing currently.
Does it add another dimension to the creative side too? Like, do you guys feel like you're especially attuned to the little details you're throwing into the episode? Like, I think one of the items you could mint from the last episode was like an off-brand Red Bull, looked like a Red Bull can, but it was branded in the Deadfellas universe language or whatever, Deadheads universe language. Like, do you guys think about that? And you're like, oh, we think this one will be big, or is that fun in the writer's room, so to speak?
Yeah, no, it's tons of fun. We saw like a bong lamp go for thousands and thousands of dollars. We've seen some really funny props. So we do consider how interesting the props can be that get given out from these episodes, because we do think that in the long term, they'll have some interesting values.
And explain to folks how they can buy these props, because it's not just your typical ETH or fiat or USDC.
So the way that Deadheads, it's only Deadheads collectors that are able to collect things from the green room at the current moment in time. But what we're tying in is this new mechanism where we have our own quote unquote currency, which is like an ecosystem currency called show token. And the way you can earn
one show equals one show, not passive income, not financial advice.
And so the way that you earn show by participating in the Deadheads ecosystem is by staking your characters into our casting pool and allowing us to use them in our series. So you passively earn an ecosystem token that you can then exchange in the green room after every episode for these collector's items. And so these collector's items could be, imagine you're watching Lord of the Rings and suddenly there's the one ring to rule them all. And you can get in and mint a limited ring to rule them all. And that ring may or may not come with some kind of utility in the future, but at the very least, it's this insanely cool collector's item that because you're such a fan of the series, you get to then own and have proof of ownership. I have only one of 10 rings that are out there in the world, or I have the only like Arya Stark needle sword. Like these collector's items that become so big in these series are really, really fun to collect. And it's something that we haven't necessarily seen happen in the digital space yet. Obviously, there's merchandise, physical merchandise that is quite popular, but on the digital side, it's quite unexplored. So that's kind of what we're extremely excited about in the Deadheads ecosystem is building out digital merchandise and digital assets.
And you mentioned that obviously you get this because you stake your deadhead and then you therefore collect show and then use the show to buy these. But explain the other side of staking and I think we may have touched on it earlier, but as we're talking about this general ecosystem, what does staking do broadly?
So you can stake your deadhead into our casting pool. And what staking does is it locks it up for a period of time. You get to choose this period. It's between 1 month and 24 months. The majority of stakers are actually staking for 24 months, so a period of 2 years. And by staking, you're essentially giving us a license to utilize your IP. So obviously, traditionally, we wouldn't be able to go out and do that. We need your permission to use your IP in our content. And so by staking it into our casting pool, you're giving us that license to do so. And in exchange for that, you get obviously cool cameos in all of our content, which you love to see because you love your character and you love seeing it sort of be expanded and see its IP expanded for you. But at the same time, you get to earn show token. So there's kind of like two benefits to you.
I think this is such an interesting concept. And I talked about it on the episode last week with John Rogers a little bit of how this is like a really fascinating and maybe sort of ideal model, which is, down the line could provide a way for folks to really reap the monetary rewards of being a part of a major IP without like breaching securities laws, like the question that I kind of have rattling around my head again as like a, dirty capitalist or whatever is, okay, well, if I'm going to own part of the IP for Lucasfilms or for Star Wars, like what I want is I want the financial side of that too. And it strikes me, and I don't want to put you in a position to get awkward with your securities attorneys or anything, but like strikes me that this is a really interesting workaround, which is to say, okay, you own the individual character IP. We sort of have this centralized control over the broader piece, but it is also sort of a decentralized IP because people own their individual characters. You stake with us, and then maybe, and I don't think you guys have said this, but maybe down the line, if we get super massive and big, we can argue that the payments we're making to you are in exchange for licensing your character. And therefore, it's not just like buy into this and you're now an investor and because that would be a clear securities violation. Is that sort of on your radar and something that's interesting to y'all?
It's actually extraordinarily interesting to us. And it's something that we had to pay a lot of attention to and be really careful with. We have a really good team of lawyers who dug into this quite heavily. And that's obviously one of the mechanisms that differentiates us. But the other one is the fact that it is just an ecosystem token. It's not a currency that you can go out and buy. There's no liquidity pools that we've created for people to go and sell for actual USD. It's this ecosystem token that lets you participate within the Deadheads universe to it's like rewards points almost, right? Like it allows you to participate at sort of a higher level.
And that was another question I had actually, which is it looks like there isn't a liquidity pool. I understand y'all clearly haven't created a liquidity pool for this. Have others created liquidity pools for show token, or that's not something that's sort of sprung up?
I think someone has on Sushi Swap. I don't think it necessarily has a ton of liquidity in it though, so we haven't necessarily had to come across that. But at some point in the future, when it does become bigger, obviously there's going to be nothing we can do to stop collectors from creating their own liquidity pools. But yeah, it hasn't been an issue yet.
And how did you all come up with this concept? Like, was there this concept of we're going to sell artifacts from the show and the staking and the earning show to buy the artifacts? Like, was this just something over time? Were you sitting with your lawyers? Like, I think this is really cool. I don't know of another project doing something like this. Tell me if there is now. And I'm assuming if there is, that's because they copied you. But like, how did you come up with this idea?
It definitely didn't happen overnight. Like we started off with the concept of the green room, and the way that it is right now in the green room, because show token, you can't actually use show token yet. This is going to be a season 2 thing. But the way it is right now, currently in the green room, is you have to trade in one of these dead tickets, which is an NFT that we gave out for free to DeadHeads holders a few months ago. And so by trading in these tickets, you get to collect these collector's items. We started seeing a lot of issues with that mechanism. Primarily was the cost of gas to A, claim a ticket, B, burn a ticket, C, mint a collector's item. And obviously using ERC20 tokens, the gas prices are reduced exponentially. And so that was sort of the first idea that sort of got us down that route. Staking was also something that we had in the back of our minds, like how can we come up with a way where we don't have to reach out individually to all these DeadHeads holders and get them to sign contracts for us to be able to use their IP. Obviously, that's not scalable in any way. So that was sort of where we came up with the staking pool. They were kind of in parallel. And then I think it was Jeremy who sort of came up with the idea of why don't we give out rewards that sort of ties the staking pool in with the green room and sort of allow this whole ecosystem to be tied together in a really unique way.
What percent of your community stakes their DeadHeads right now? Is that information you're open to sharing?
I believe it's roughly 20% at this point. A combination of burning and staking.
I don't know what that means, but I think that's great. I'm like trying to think if I have a commentary on if that's bullish for the project or bear. I think it sounds great.
I mean, I can tell you Matt Kalish owns like 130 or something. He staked all of them for 2 years. Our other biggest holder owns 140 or something, and he staked all of his for 2 years. Like we
was it Matt who said he's got the best deadhead?
Yes, that was Matt.
The props and drops episode. He's like, no, I just need the world to understand that I have the best deadhead.
Exactly. So he finally staked it, so we can now use it in all of our content.
Well, you better pick it, man. I mean, it's the best deadhead. So cool. Well, I want to talk about your episodes, and I first want to commend either you or somebody on your team for the music choices. I think y'all, I'm going to curse here, so if you have kids, I fucking nailed the music. I'm like, music is such an integral part to any sort of artistic experience to me. I think I spent more time picking the theme music for this show than I did like prepping any other element of this show. So by the way, y'all in the comments, I really appreciate it when you compliment the theme music, because like I spent time on that. So I think that's fantastic. Did either of you, who runs the music on this thing?
It's a guy called Jeremy, Remix Jeremy, and he's our sound designer. He worked with Travis Scott and McDonald's in the past. He's extremely talented.
Oh yeah, okay. So yeah, he's a serious dude, and it shows. I mean, there's the first. If you guys haven't watched the DeadHeads show, just watch like the first minute of the first episode. The way it goes from it, just like the way the vibe evolves in that first minute is so good. I'm curious though, what is the goal with these episodes? They run from, I don't know if the shortest one's like 4 minutes to 10 minutes. I know you said the next one, episode 5 might be a bit longer. It's the first with a full professional writing team. But what is the goal here? To get attention from Netflix? Like what was the ambition with this initial round of animations?
The initial goal with season 1 is to prove the concept and to show traditional media the power of Web3 entertainment specifically. So showing them how viable it is, getting their attention, showing that it's possible, showing them how to do it. And in the background, we're forming all these connections and potential partnerships with more traditional Web2 media who are starting to notice, hey, like this is something that is here to stay. This is something that adds a ton of value to holders and fans. And it's something that is essentially the future for a ton of big media brands. So it's very much proof of concept stage, season 1. Season 2, we're really going to be ramping up in terms of partnerships and in terms of quality as well. And then the end goal is to create a big feature film of DeadHeads and get it in, whether it's box office or it's Netflix, Amazon, some kind of streaming service, get it on there. So
I love that. So it's film over a TV show. Like if y'all had to pick, if you had both options, Netflix, like we'll do a show with you, we'll do a movie with you, but you got to pick one. Is movie where you want to go?
It's tough.
Or no strong preference?
Because movies, like to produce a full feature movie, it takes time, right? Like it'll be like 2 years of time. So whereas like a season 2, we can probably get done in a lot quicker. So
so it's more like seasons and then a movie ultimately down the line.
Yeah, I mean we're not necessarily married to anything, but that's kind of our North Star at this point, is to partner with some big media brands, make sure we get a ton of eyeballs on this in terms of distribution, and create content that people at the end of the day really want to see and start to fall in love with.
It might seem like an absurd nitpick. Like, obviously, if Netflix offers you anything, you're thrilled. But I didn't know if there was something strategic there where I'm interested in the business mechanics and the strategery around building IP. And I didn't know if there was a reason that a movie, from what y'all have learned, is somehow like going to catapult IP more than a TV show would, or something like that. But it sounds like there's no super
Yeah.
strong preference there. It's
Yeah, what I'll say to the idea of episode or movie, I think the general core concept that we're looking at is like a lot of people can't relate to wanting to be part of a community where the value is so online and rubbing shoulders with other crypto natives. Be it, let's say you're in a Discord and the value is to like be another one of these holders in the Discord because you're like connected to them online. A lot of people can't relate to this vision, right? It's like you join a tennis club, you join to be partners with these people who play tennis in your local community. And when you join a Discord, I mean, if you don't play tennis, you don't join a tennis club. If you don't play on the Discord, if you don't play online with Twitter and Discord, you don't play in these communities. So for us, the core fundamental vision is like, we got to produce desire through fandom, a fandom community, and you're able to participate because it relates to your life. Once it gets those Netflix movie levels, it can relate to your life, opposed to like having to relate to being part of a Discord or a Twitter.
So how are those Web 2 conversations going? Any alpha to share with us there? And is
Web 2
episode
conversations.
5? Yeah, you said, it's proof of concept. You're trying to show Web 2 how it's going, Web 2 media. How does that go? What does that sound like? What are the pushbacks? What's the excitement? Like, give us the scoop on all of it.
I mean, we've heard from some people who disrupted these industries that they just love it. We've heard from other people who disrupted IPs that like if they were alive now, they would have never had to, do what they had done. We have noticed everyone in Hollywood take note, and people came in like stoner cats and if had given it a shot but aren't exactly sure how to navigate it, and they're getting their feet. And then there's people like Matrix and Ghostbusters who have kind of done the same, where it's like we don't want to give you anything, we just want to make money from you basically and sell you something, but they're trying to layer on interesting ways they can add utility to their credit. And I really want them all to like do really well because it would help us. In short, Hollywood at large are noticing there's interest in NFTs, but I'm not sure they're piecing together why perfectly. I'm not sure we are either, but together, as we go on this journey, there's no doubt that it's like entertainment is Web3 is coming for entertainment the same way it is for finance and gaming.
Have you had conversations with major streamers?
We've had conversations with people, who have worked or work there, but we haven't done anything remotely concrete. More just trying to understand what we're doing and understand how, impactful it could be because we're the people kind of doing it right now. So we have weekly meetings about that kind of stuff.
Lay that groundwork. So you have episode 5 coming out. Reiterate for me the uniqueness of episode 5. Is it going to be longer? It's a full writer's room. Tell me it's episode 5 of season 1. That's what's next?
Episode 5 of season 1 is next. It's going to be the biggest and highest quality one yet, or at least I sure hope it is. I've seen the animatic for it already, and it's fucking awesome. Like, we have a really talented animation director who stepped in for episode 5 and 6 now, which is a bit of a hole in what we'd had previously. So I'm really excited to see that sort of come to life. And then, like Jeremy's touched on as well, really good, solid professional writers who just sort of make it a little bit more entertaining for people not necessarily in the crypto world specifically, which is something that we've constantly gone back and forth on, Jeremy and I, like whether, like how niche do we want to go with the jokes and with the content and with the references and stuff. And I think with these new writers, we're striking a really good balance between it's still clearly for the NFT community, but in a much more subtle way where it's still entertaining for anybody who doesn't know anything about crypto or NFTs.
I was wondering about that because it is ripe with colloquial references from Cosmo de Medici and stoner cats and, all these sort of very specific references, which is fun if you're in on the joke for sure. Okay, so how many episodes are planned for season 1? And then is the hope that season 2... is the plan for season 2 to also be on YouTube, or that's where maybe there's an intermediary step between YouTube and Amazon Web Services, or just give that kind of roadmap? And I apologize, it might be out there.
Yeah, what we're looking at, so 6 episodes of season 1, and we're calling it kind of like a pilot season. What we want to do, like I said, sort of earlier, is we were fan first, so now we need to understand our story for our fans. So to do that, it's going to require a bit of experimentation. So before season 2, we're going to experiment with 1 to 2 minute shorts written by a variety of professional writers, and anyone can write one. We're going to have like kind of open that process up, look at tons of animators, directors, and all the like, and really put our resources to the test to find the narrative that resonates with our community the strongest, and then build up off that in season 2. And I can't speak to who may or may not pick it up, because it depends on how we deliver and how we produce it and how well we do.
So I have to say, talking to you guys, I rarely want to launch an NFT. Being in this space, though I am, or maybe because I'm in this space as deep as I am, I know how much work it is. So I very rarely am like, tomorrow's when my project's coming. I may someday decide to launch one, but it would only be if I really felt like there was very clear value I could add and a real need for it and whatever. But I have to say, listening to you guys talk about this, you're one of the few projects that like I'm like, oh, this kind of makes me want to launch an NFT because I don't know, you make it sound fun. And the building a story world and all the rest of it. One thing that terrifies me when I think about launching an NFT project is like the forever nature of it. Like it feels like we're at least in a stage of the NFT world where like you're marrying this thing, like the original founders can't leave. And does that scare you guys ever? Or do you feel like, oh, well, in 5 years, we want to be in this for 5 years anyways. And at that point, it'll be big enough that there can be a new CEO who comes on? Or how do you think about that relationship to time?
I think it's something that we're both so passionate about that it really hasn't scared us at all. Like we're at the end of the day, we're both really just creatives who want to create things and want to innovate in a space that's so untraversed. Like it's so fun, and there's gonna be so many other things that we obviously can do down the line as we continue down this path in the world of NFTs. But in terms of sort of feeling pigeonholed or whatever, like it's really honestly felt like a godsend, and I think a lot of that comes from our community itself. Like we have one of the most precious communities. It's of like the entire NFT space. Like everybody, I love every single person in our entire community, and that they really make like they take the stress away from managing an NFT project because they're so understanding and they're so passionate and they're so creative themselves that it really rubs off on us as founders as well, which is what keeps us so driven and keeps us so passionate about what we're doing.
That's beautiful. And on that note, I think maybe having one of you talk about the Twitter Impact Program.
The Twitter Impact Program is an initiative that we launched about a month and a half ago, where the inspiration for it came from the fact that we really needed to expand our reach outside of our community. Like we have a really strong, passionate community. It's quite small in terms of the entire NFT ecosystem. And so what we really wanted to start incentivizing was people going out and expanding their reach and becoming sort of influencers, as it were, that are still part of the DeadHeads ecosystem. So obviously with Bored Apes is sort of the prime example. A ton of Bored Ape holders are like really big influencers in the space, which really helps gain eyeballs on their project specifically, and it's something that really helped them succeed in the early days. And Jeremy, who's a massive golf fan, can't play for the life of him, but he loves watching the PGA. And there's something called the PGA Player Impact Program, which is where we got the entirety of the inspiration from. And essentially what it is the exact same thing as our Twitter Impact Program, where it's not necessarily the best golfers that go out and make the most money in the Player Impact Program. It's the players that actually make the most impact in terms of viewership and bringing new people into the game. So that's where all the inspiration came from. And it sort of manifested itself into this Twitter Impact Program, where we have prizes of $100,000 going to the most highly contributors on Twitter who help sort of grow our brand and expand our reach.
Sounds like baseball could use that too. It's just about how do we get young people to watch this sport? Is that what I'm hearing?
Exactly. I mean, Tempo kicked me while my connection was down, but we saw that it was a great way to utilize the people when you have individuals that are high value that make your sport more powerful. Incentivizing that process is necessary.
Maybe walk me just one step deeper on this. You talk about this $100,000 that you have as a pool. Is this somebody tweets and then somebody joins the Discord and is like, oh, I saw this from so-and-so's tweet, they get money? Or how do you figure out how to distribute these rewards to your community?
The leaderboard is all based off of engagement and reach on Twitter specifically. So you put out a tweet that mentions DeadHeads, tags DeadHeads, hashtags DeadHeads, and however many people that tweet reaches, that's a direct impact on our brand specifically, because it brings all those people in and gets them sort of recognized. Gets our brand recognized, I should say.
So when Gary Vee interviewed you guys for Props and Drops, did he just get the whole, just the 100K just went all to Gary? One tweet.
Gary's DQ'd.
Okay. Fair. Very cool. I think that's awesome. I just want to kind of talk broadly about what you've learned in this process. And I mentioned earlier, you were on an episode of Props and Drops, which was one of Gary Vee's podcasts, and Matt Kalish, et cetera. And they asked you if you've considered taking outside investment. And at the time, I think you said, oh, that's an interesting question. And I'd love for you to talk about what that calculation looks like. If you have any new thoughts on that, if you're thinking about it, like, just kind of the business calculation you guys are making on outside investment versus just raising from the community.
It's been incredibly simple for us so far, which is, do we need money? And so far the answer has always been no. And we've always had enough money through all these community raises where we haven't had to go out and seek external funding. When we do go out and need external funding for something that costs a ton of money, like a feature film, for example, that's when we're definitely going to have to go out and have a sort of a round of funding for that. But thus far, it hasn't really been something that we've had to worry about, which is very much a blessing.
So it's something you expect down the line. There will be massive expenses that will probably require going externally. Is it something where you see if you could get the millions from a community first, or it's going to be so clearly out of reach that you'll definitely want to go out to outside sources?
I think it's very much a play by ear type thing. Like if we need $100 million, we're obviously not going to be able to get that from our community, so we're going to have to go and explore different ways of doing that. But at the same time, it depends on where we're at. And, when we do need that funding, say it's a year down the road, who knows where we're going to be a year down the road. Like we've already seen, like Artifact, Mutant Apes, like all these different projects are able to raise, $100 million from their community. So it's possible, but it's more of a play by ear type thing.
You too could be bought by Nike.
Yeah, exactly.
No, I'm just kidding. So what are the biggest learnings? Like, what have you learned about building intellectual property and building IP? What have been the things that have surprised you and just the biggest takeaways?
I mean, we've learned a lot and still feel like there's so much unlearned. It's quite remarkable, actually, like how intricate this is. I think talking to a lot of professionals who have understood IP historically, we've learned a lot about the model we're choosing. And oftentimes, it does come up to some resistance. I think like overall in this project, there's just been so many learnings. And I think one of the greatest ones is that this the macros in a market will like have their preferences, and like you kind of need to build true to your North Star, because if the theory was there at the start, it doesn't change based on your floor. It doesn't change what happened yesterday. If the theory is good, the hypothesis is right, you need to sort of fulfill upon it. And you need to understand that the macros might not understand, but you have to build it. So our fan community, our NFT entertainment model, this absolutely unexplored territory is our gift to go in and like have fun and create. And with that, we need to trust the process and enjoy it.
Tempo, what about you?
Yeah, like just to expand on that, there's projects in the NFT space that are just that. They're NFT projects, and if their floor goes down and people lose interest, their project's dead, right? Like that's just 100% what they are. Whereas with DeadHeads, we're like a multimedia brand that's using Web3 technology and using NFTs as this mechanism of decentralizing our IP. And so as long as we have funding, we have our vision, we're making all these amazing connections like outside of the NFT space. And so like we're not necessarily on a timer of raise our floor to 10 ETH or we're going to die in 1 month. Like we can take our time, build IP, which obviously takes a lot of time to build, and stick with our long-term vision and make sure that we're growing something that's here to stay.
So I know you all have talked to people who work for major IP, and I'm curious, what do you ask them? What have you learned about the process of building a story or building a story world, or what areas of focus have you, kind of homed in on when you're talking to players who've already built massive IP?
I think talking to traditional natives of IP and entertainment gives us an idea and a window into like why it worked then. And sort of it enables us to like meet really like important people and like understand their theories behind what they would do in our position. The specifics of that like are sort of manifesting in the shorts that we're talking about and understanding our own narrative and our own story better. And they also manifest in the way in which we're going to be doing like casting and sort of ways in which we're going to give all, and if we're hoping like, bring in a lot of other projects and give everybody the advantage of utility that Deadheads holders have. And I just like within our project, like we had Bored Apes in episode 2 and we had Cool Cats in episode 5, and like really making that process stronger and more beneficial to the holders. I mean, anyone who has experience is helpful in a mentor capacity. The specifics, no one knows. So you're just kind of having fun with them and throwing darts.
Yeah, it's also incredibly inspiring talking to these people who have really disrupted IP and disrupted media, and sort of getting their takes, not only from the sense that like everybody kind of starts off in the same way where it's very like kind of bare bones, kind of hustling, like they see us and they say, yeah, we were in that exact same boat. Like when we started out, this is just the way that it is. And then also getting the confirmation from them, like hearing someone of their stature, like watch our episodes and say the content's actually really good, and having the confidence that they have in us to say like, you guys are going to make it. It's something that really like helps us sort of stay grounded and not worry about anything happening short term, and just know that we're on a good path.
Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much for joining me. Really, it's been such a pleasure learning about your project, both in doing research before this interview and diving deeper with the two of you here. I think it is really bold what you guys are doing. I love the way you guys are innovating. I hope other projects in the space take notes, because I think it helps us all when the space is just better. Anything that I didn't touch on that you're like, well, we have to talk about this. This is the main thing about Deadheads. Anything I missed or final words?
We said so much good content about the narrative. We've talked about fan community engagement. We've talked about the green room and the tech. We've talked about sort of top to bottom how we developed it. So it's tough to add anything to that. I will just say thank you so much for having us. Thank you for appreciating what we're building. I hope more people in the space build based around what they want to build, not try and play into the average opinion of what they think people will buy, because NFTs as a medium have a ton of potential. And I think if we as a community enjoy that potential and build upon it, then we're helping the entire space in the long term.
Yeah, they also have a ton of staying power too, which is something that I know a lot of NFT creators they may feel rushed, and Jeremy and I kind of felt the same way early on with Deadheads, that like, oh my God, this is like, this is something that we just got to get out there before, NFTs crash, because NFTs are highly speculative, which they are very highly speculative. But in terms of the actual technology, it's 100% here to stay. It's going to disrupt so many different industries, and Hollywood's going to be one of them. And hopefully that's us. So thank you so much for having us on here.
Till next
time. It's been an
time.
absolute pleasure as always.
Fascinating fact about you, Jeremy, that I just learned is that you don't have like a one home base, unless I'm wrong about that. You basically live out of a suitcase and travel the world, and have been doing that for the last 4 years or so. Is that true?
Yeah, so I live out of a suitcase, and I have for many years now. The biggest appeal for me is there's so much to see, and working remote, you're working across time zones as well. So I basically have a suitcase with some clothes, and I have a pair of shoes on my feet, and I travel around the world, and I spend a few months in different locations. And in those locations, I get to meet new people and experience life like on a different perspective. And I always think that like unique problems need unique problem solvers. So like by doing all these things and encountering all these unique problems, I'm able to like find ways in my life that I can make like an impact. And so I would attribute like a lot of my success to the fact that I have had like all these unique experiences.
And you're in El Salvador right now, so I have to ask, have you been talking to folks about the Bitcoin as legal tender thing, and like what's the vibe on
My
like
coffee shop
do people even like care?
Yeah, my coffee shop yesterday had like a sign with a Bitcoin, and below they said like NFTs are sold here. I'll send it to you after this. It's like it's everywhere. It's everywhere.
It said, I missed it, but I know we have it on the recording, but it said NFTs as, like as payment.
It's like Bitcoin, and then below it's like we also sell NFTs or something like that. Yeah.
And are people like, do people do it? Like, are people into it, or is it more like on the commercial side, businesses are into it, but
for the general population aren't really into it at all. The general population seems to be pretty resistant to it, but the stores are forced to accept it. So like there's kind of a
Right.
tug and war. And like I think that's how any early adoption phase is.
Yeah.
So I mean you can't really fault it. The fact they're even like accepting it as a payment is like pretty incredible.
Cool. Okay. Thank you guys truly for coming. I think we'll figure this out again. And thank you, Tempo. Thank you, Jeremy. I think we just lost Jeremy. So Tempo, goodbye. Thank you. And I can't wait to have you guys back on in 2 years and we'll check in on the project.
Hey, we hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, head over to Bankless HQ right now to develop your crypto investing skills and learn how to free yourself from banks and gain your financial independence. We recommend joining our daily newsletter, podcast, and community as a Bankless Premium subscriber to get the most out of your Bankless experience. You'll get access to our market analysis, our alpha leaks, and exclusive content, and even the Bankless token for airdrops, raffles, and unlocks. If you're interested in crypto, the Bankless community is where you want to be. Click the link in the description to become a Bankless Premium subscriber today. Also, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for in-depth interviews with industry leaders, Ask Me Anythings, and weekly roll-ups where we summarize the week in crypto and other fantastic content. Thanks everyone for watching and being on the journey as we build out the Bankless Nation.